I'm Lizzie, and welcome to a very boring, very echoey corner of my unfinished house. Now, the reason that I came inside today is because it's super cold outside, so I thought we'd cover the topic of learning how to read the horse's foot. You might be wondering what that means, but if you're a horse owner or if you're thinking about getting a horse, it's super important that you understand how to read your horse's feet. The horse's hoof, their feet, are their foundation, quite literally. So it's super important that they have a solid, well-functioning foundation to support all of their weight on. Now, even if you have a really qualified farrier or hoof trimmer working on your horses, or maybe you are that qualified farrier or hoof trimmer, it's still super important to educate yourself on how to read a hoof. Now, for some reason, equestrians hate it when you compare horses to horses in the wild, because the domesticated horses have been so removed from their natural habitat that they don't function the same as a wild horse. Or so we thought. Maybe it's just us causing them not to function like they should be if they were in the wild. So one of the biggest things that wild horses have on domesticated horses is hoof quality. The majority of wild horses have the most functioning, healthy feet that you'll ever see in any horse. So we should probably take a note out of their book and try to apply it to our horses. And that's exactly what David Landerville has been working towards. So we're gonna go over the entire anatomy of the horse's hoof, and we're going to learn all of its functions and what a healthy hoof is supposed to look like. Then we're gonna go over some really common dysfunctions that most domesticated horses exist with just because of lack of knowledge in the realm of hoof care. So here I've mapped out the entire bottom of the hoof. Now you can Google these kind of images, or you can screenshot this if you want to. Basically, I just want to go over all of the main points of the outside of the horse's hoof so that you have a clear image of what you are actually looking at when you look at the bottom of your horse's hoof. Now, I just want to keep things really basic and really simple. I'm not a professional. I'm just here to encourage everybody to learn more about their horse, and I'm just going to share basic information that every equestrian should know about their horse's feet. So this is an example of a healthy, functioning hoof. So we have the toe up here in this area, which comes down to about right there. And then the quarters start from right here down to about right here. Then you have your heel, which comes from the quarters down all the way to your heel line. So your toe starts from the very top of the hoof down to about here, then you have your quarters, and then you have your heel. So toe, quarters, heel. So now we're going to start from the outside of the hoof in. We have the hoof wall, which is the outside of the entire hoof. Then the very next layer beyond the hoof wall is the water line, which is also known as the inner hoof wall. And that usually looks like a white line just inside of the hoof wall. And then, funny enough, the next line is called the white line, but it actually has more of a yellow hue skin tone color to it. So we have hoof wall, we have water line, and we have white line. Then there is the sole, which is the bulk of the bottom of the hoof. That's all of this material down here. Down here, you then have the bars, which are on either side of the frog. They are basically the same as the hoof wall. They just come inside for more support on the inside. These are your bars. The frog is this thing right here. This is the soft tissue. This is a very important part of a functioning hoof. And then this little divot inside of the frog is the center sulcus. And then lastly, you have the heel bulbs, which are right above your heels and the bottom of your frog. And these tell a lot about the functioning and the health of your hoof. So that pretty much covers the entire bottom of the hoof, okay? You've got your hoof wall, you've got your water line, then you have your white line, and then you have your sole, which is the bulk of all of this center stuff right here. You have your bars that come on either side of your frog, which is kind of shaped like a heart in a very strange upside down way. You have your frog, which should be looking like this if you want it healthy and functioning. You then have your heel bulbs, your center sulcus, and your toe, quarter, heel. Those are all very, very important things to know, to remember, and to get a really good picture of, so that you know exactly what you're looking at when you look at the bottom of your horse's foot. Now let's go over the profile of the outside of your horse's foot. It's pretty basic. You've got your coronary band right here, which is the hairline. So coronary band, boom, hairline. You've got your dorsal wall, which is another word for the front of the foot. You've got your palmar or plantar, which is another word for the back of the foot. And then you've got your grid. Now, the grid will tell you a lot about your horse's foot, the way they carry their weight, and how things are functioning on the inside. So the grid consists of the horn tubules, which are the parallel lines that go from the dorsal all the way back down to the palmar. And they are very in line with the dorsal to the palmar. They stay very straight all the way down on the ideal hoof. Now the other part of the grid is the growth rings, which are also known as event lines. And these grow along the coronary band all the way down to the bottom of the hoof. Now these growth rings also give you a ton of information on what is going on the inside of the foot. So you have your dorsal wall, which is front. You have your palmar plantar, which is the back of the foot. You have your grid, which are these parallel lines that go from the dorsal to the palmar. You have your coronary band, which is your hairline, and you have your growth rings that go from the coronary band down to the bottom of the foot. Now this is an ideal foot. You have a healthy, natural curve in your coronary band from the dorsal to the palmar. You have even low-profile growth rings that grow from the coronary band all the way down with not a lot of change, and you have very even horn tubules that are very parallel from the dorsal wall to the palmar wall. This is ideal. This is what a healthy functioning hoof looks like. Now also remember, we have our toe, we have our quarters, and we have our heel. So in a high functioning hoof, like a wild horse's foot, when they are traveling 20 miles a day, they get this arch right in their quarters. So they have support in the toe and they have support in the heel. And there's the arch in the quarters. Now this is something you don't want to force in the hoof, but this is something that does develop when the hoof is high functioning. Let's go back to the bottom of the foot. Now a lot of people think that the ideal hoof is nice and round, when ideally the widest part of the hoof should be back by the heels in this area right here. And that is because a healthy hoof will allow the horse to bear most of the weight back at the heels area right here. If their digital cushion and soft tissue is high functioning, that allows the horse to put a lot of their weight, most of their weight, on the heels. This is going to be the most comfortable for them, and it's going to allow the horse and the hoof to function at its highest potential. Now let's go over some very common but very dysfunctional things that you see in the modern domestic horse. And the reason these things are common is because a lot of people don't actually know what they're looking at when they're looking at the bottom of the foot. One of the most common things you see in a foot these days is underrun heels. And the reason it's so common is because when you look at it from the profile view like this is a very rough sketch, you would look at this foot and you would think, well, that's a decent sized plantar or palmar, whatever you want to call it. If I took that down, it would seem like it would be way not enough heel and your horse's hairline would be sitting on the ground. When actually that's not the case. This is an underrun heel. And if you look at the grid of any horse that has underrun heels, they have these lines that are parallel to the dorsal, but when you get closer to the heel, they tend to pull under themselves like this. And this is a very good indication that your horse has underrun heels. And David Landerville puts it in a very good way, where you have to imagine all of these lines are attached to a string. And when the heel becomes underrun, it's like the string is pulling all of these lines in like a drawstring. So you think, well, this heel is super underrun, but there's not really any material there you could take down, otherwise your hairline would be sitting on the ground. But that's not really the case, because when you have, let's look at the bottom of the foot again. Quickly draw up bottom of the foot. When you have a foot with underrun heels, this is the toe. The heels are way up here. So this would be an underrun heel. You have your heels way up here when Remember, they're supposed to come all the way down here to meet the bottom of the frog. So you actually have a lot of material you can take off at these heels without making the hairline drop to the ground. And it's super uncomfortable for the horse to walk on these overgrown heels because they're not actually bearing weight on the edge of the heel like they're supposed to be. They're actually putting weight that's pressing the heel into the hoof because their weight is going to be back here more. So if your horse has underrun heels like this, they're going to be very ouchy in the back of their foot, which is going to make them put more pressure on their toe. And horses that favor their heel and put pressure on their toe start to walk toe first. That means when they're walking, their toe hits the ground before the rest of the hoof. Now, it's super common for horses to have toe first landing, but it is very detrimental to the rest of their leg and their foot and the rest of their body, and it increases the risk of tripping, and it also wears at the toe a lot more, and it starts to break away at the material at their sole. So all of that is not good. So because I don't have time to draw out every single dysfunction that is super common in the domesticated horse, I'm going to try to pull some images from Google so you can get a clear image of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go over a list of indicators of a problem in your horse's feet, so that if you're a horse owner, you can catch these things really early before they cause a lot of issues in your horse later on. Retained dead sole is a huge one. Now, a healthy, well-functioning hoof will never get this. A healthy sole almost has the same kind of imprint as your fingerprint. So if you look at a healthy hoof with a good sole, it looks very kind of shiny and also kind of like a pattern to it. It's much harder seeming than retained dead sole. Retained dead sole is very flaky, very soft, and it looks dead. Horses tend to retain the dead sole if they don't have proper hoof care, if they don't have proper lifestyle, if they are locked up in small pens all the time, they don't have proper movement. It can even be a mineral deficiency if they're not shedding their soles properly. Hoof wall flares. Now, a lot of people will tell you that your horse's feet will just flare if they're getting long. Now, letting your horse's feet get long is not great, but it shouldn't cause immediate flares, and your horse shouldn't flare within your trim cycle if your horse's feet are well balanced. A poorly balanced hoof is way more likely to flare. That also goes hand in hand with cracking, because if your horse's hoof is flaring and cracking, that's also a very big indicator that there is bad balance in the hoof. Uneven heel bulbs. Now, if you go back and look at the map that we just drew of the bottom of the horse's feet, you can look at the heel bulbs. And if you go and compare them to your horse's heel bulbs, and your horse has a heel bulb that's a lot lower than your other heel bulb or a lot bigger, that means that there's a lot of imbalance in that horse's hoof, and they're putting a lot more weight on one side than the other side. An underdeveloped frog is a huge one, and it's a huge reason why there's a lot of lame horses, because the frog is very important that it's high functioning. That is your soft tissue. That is what makes the horse comfortable. And if they're not able to bear weight on that, and if it's sensitive, that means that your entire hoof and your entire horse is not going to be comfortable on their feet. No hoof wall at the toe. And this is also a huge one. So if you go back and look at the map that we just drew, you can look at the hoof wall that goes all the way around the hoof. Now, if you compare that to your horse's hoof, and you can only see the hoof wall on the heels and the quarters, but it disappears around the toe, that means your horse doesn't have any hoof wall at the toe, which means that they don't have a lot of support at the toe, which also means that they're bearing all of their weight on the white line and on their sole, which is not comfortable for them, and especially if they don't have a well-functioning heel, they're going to be putting all of their weight on their sole, which can be very detrimental to the sole and to the whole function of the hoof. Collapsed underrun heels, we already went over that one. A soft hoof wall, now this could be environment if your horse is living in a very small muddy pen 24/7. It's also very likely a mineral deficiency. If your horse has very soft feet, it's very likely they're lacking something in their minerals. Dramatic event lines. Remember, part of the grid was the event lines, which are the growth rings. Now, dramatic event lines means that something dramatic happened to that foot within that growth period. So if you always let your horse's feet get really long before trimming them, you'll notice that after a trim, they'll grow out this really dramatic event line. And that is because the horse's foot experienced a really dramatic change. It doesn't always mean bad, but it's not always good, because you don't want your horse's feet to have to experience that massive change. It's not good for their entire body to have a dramatic change already, unless it's super necessary for rehab. But if your horse is on a regular hoof trim cycle, they shouldn't have to experience those dramatic changes. And actually things like thrush and abscesses have a lot to do with your horse's trim. A lot of people just associate it with weather or their environment, which it can be, but it's most likely due to imbalanced hoof trim. If your horse has a really well-functioning hoof, they don't get things like thrush and abscesses. Abscesses grow under things like long bars or overrun heels, or they grow under places like a malnourished frog. So everything that gets neglected and isn't getting used right by the horse gets things like abscesses and thrush because it's not being activated. It's just growing bad bacteria in there. It's not getting flushed out. Another thing that's a very big alarm is a bull-nosed hoof, where it's bowed at the dorsal wall of your horse's foot. That means there's a lot of imbalance in your horse's foot. Narrow heels is a huge one, and it happens a lot in shoeing, but it also happens in barefoot trim. And collapsed heel bulbs also kind of goes hand in hand with a narrow heel. So picture this is your foot, okay? The heels are my thumbs. When you get a narrow heel, they kind of go in like that. So say your heel bulbs are at the bottoms of your heels. So your heels are your thumbs. Now bring your heel bulbs down to the bottom of your thumbs. When your thumbs get closer together, the heel bulbs kind of collapse and they go inside the foot more. So if you're looking at the back of your horse's foot, it'll look like the heel bulbs kind of collapsed inside of your horse's heels. And something I've seen a lot is horses that try to elevate their heels. Now I've seen people asking what to do when their horse is like backing themselves up against their stall and trying to put their weight on their toes. And a lot of times people will tell them that they need shims in the back of their heels so that they can stand on their toes because they look more comfortable that way. But it's not actually the horse wanting to stand on their toes. It's actually the horse just not wanting to stand on their heels. So by putting a shim in the back of their heels to make them stand in the position that they look so comfortable in is suddenly now not actually getting the result that the horse was trying to achieve by lifting their heels and trying to alleviate their heels. And that's because you're tipping your horse on their toes, which they were trying to do, but you're also putting weight up against their heel, which was what they were trying to alleviate. Not only are you making it uncomfortable for their heels again, because that's what hurts them, but you're also making them walk on their toes, which is not good for anything. So those are just a couple of things that seem very common in the domesticated horse. So I just want to bring awareness to these things so that owners can look at their horse's feet and know if there is something wrong. It can be very difficult to find a good hoof trimmer, and if you don't know anything about hoofs, you have no idea if you have a good hoof trimmer or not. All you know is if your horse is sound or if your horse is lame, and you don't know if it was the trim that caused it or maybe something else. So it doesn't matter if you just go and you pay the most expensive farrier, you still don't know if you're getting quality work. You really have to know what you're looking at the hoof to make sure that you know that you have a good farrier or a hoof trimmer. So understanding the basics of what a hoof is supposed to look like and knowing how to identify issues in the hoof as soon as they appear, that'll for one help you know if you have a good hoof trimmer or not, but it'll also help you keep your horse sound. Well, my last good camera battery just died, so I'm gonna have to make this video a little bit shorter than I was intending. I didn't quite touch on some things that I would have liked to, so if you guys found this video interesting and helpful, and if you want to learn more, just let me know down in the comments and I can do a more full coverage on this topic. The hoof is a super complex, very important part of the horse's function, so it's really important that it's done right. There is so many horses that are put down just because of bad hoof care, which is super sad, especially when you know it can be saved and it can be prevented in the first place. I'm trying to bring awareness and educate horse owners so that we can all do better for our horses, so that we don't have to watch our horses suffer and go lame and eventually crumble into the grave because their feet just cannot hold them up any longer. That's not a problem that needs to happen. It only happens because of lack of knowledge. So if we all continue to try to learn, obviously nobody wants that to happen to their horse. So I'm just trying to encourage people to ask more questions and get more educated on every aspect of the horse. But that'll wrap up today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big like and subscribe. You can go follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and I'll see you guys next week Sunday. Bye!